My parents told me, go live in the streets. At Thanksgiving, they didn't know I earned $35 million for weeks later. Stay with me as I tell you what really happened, and if this story reaches you in any way, I hope you'll show some support by sticking around, leaving a like, and sharing it with the people who matter to you. I never thought I would hear my own parents say something so cold, especially on a holiday that's supposed to be about family. But that Thanksgiving, everything in the Hale house felt different the moment I walked in. My mother, Alora, gave me the usual stiff smile, and my father, Grant, barely looked up from the table. My younger brother, Beckett, greeted me with that easy charm everyone fell for. Everyone except me. I had learned a long time ago that his smile hid more lies than truth. Dinner started with small talk, but it didn't take long for the comments to begin. My mother asked why I still wasn't settled, as if my worth existed only in marriage or approval. My father asked if I had finally learned how to manage money, even though they knew nothing about my life anymore. I kept quiet, letting their words pass over me. I'd spent years building a medical tech platform and selling it for a net $35 million, but they never cared enough to ask what I actually did. Then Beckett leaned back in his chair and said something that froze the whole room. He claimed I still owed the family $40,000, money I never borrowed, never touched, never even heard about. He said it casually, like it was the most obvious fact in the world, and my parents believed him instantly. They always believed him. He was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even when he did everything wrong. I tried to explain, but Grant cut me off with a look I'd seen too many times growing up. Disappointment mixed with anger he never directed at his favorite child. If you can't quit freeloading, Savrin, he said, then maybe you should go live in the streets. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were true, they weren't, but because they came from the man who was supposed to protect me, not throw me away. The room went silent. No one defended me. Not my mother. Not my brother. They all just stared. So I stood up. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask them to understand. I picked up my coat, walked to the door, and stepped out into the cold night. No one followed. No one asked me to stay. As I drove away, the weight of years of being pushed aside finally cracked open inside me. They thought they could shame me into silence forever, but they had no idea who I had become, or what I was capable of. For weeks later, they would learn the truth. And they would regret the moment they told me to live in the streets. Savrin grew up knowing she would never be the child her mother wanted. Even as a little girl, every small mistake became a weakness Alora pointed out loudly. If Savrin brought home an A, Alora asked why it wasn't an A+. If she won an award, Alora said it was cute, but nothing impressive. Meanwhile, Beckett could spill juice on the carpet or forget his homework, and Alora would laugh it off as if he were a harmless, charming child. That pattern never changed. By the time they were teenagers, Beckett lived in constant praise, and Savrin lived in constant evaluation. Grant wasn't as vocal as Alora, but his silence carried its own weight. Whenever Savrin achieved something real, an internship, a scholarship, a research award, he called it luck, or said she got it because they needed more girls. But when Beckett managed even the smallest task, like showing up on time or finishing a basic assignment, Grant acted like he had climbed a mountain. It confused Savrin for years. No matter how hard she worked, her efforts were invisible next to her brother's effortless approval. When Savrin moved out at 19, it wasn't because she wanted freedom. It was because she couldn't breathe in that house anymore. What pushed her over the edge was Alora's final sentence that night during an argument. "You just aren't built for this family, Savrin." There was no shouting afterward, no apology, no attempt to understand. Just a cold dismissal. She packed her bags and left before sunrise. What her parents never knew was that leaving didn't mean she stopped caring. For 5 years, she quietly sent money home, wanting to help with utilities, medical bills, and repairs. She didn't want praise, she just wanted to ease their burden. But they never once thanked her. They never even mentioned receiving the help. She assumed they were still angry and didn't want to acknowledge anything from her. The truth surfaced much later. Every payment she sent had been intercepted by Beckett. He took the money, spent it, and then bragged to their parents that he was the one keeping the house running. While Savrin struggled to build her career, he used her support to polish his image. It wasn't one mistake or one moment. It was years of deception that shaped how her family saw her. Now, as she sits alone in her motel room after Thanksgiving, the pieces fall together in her mind. Her parents never cared about the truth. They only cared about the stories that made Beckett shine and made Savrin the problem. Facts didn't matter. Evidence didn't matter. Their loyalty was tied to comfort, not honesty. For the first time in years, Savrin stops feeling sad and starts feeling certain. She isn't going to let their version of her life define her anymore. She will expose what Beckett did, and she will free herself from a role she never deserved. The truth belongs to her now, and she intends to use it. Savrin chose a modest long-stay motel, even though she could afford any penthouse in the city. She didn't want comfort, she wanted clarity. The quiet room gave her space to breathe after the chaos of Thanksgiving. The walls were plain, the furniture simple, but it felt safer than her parents' home had felt in years. She set her bags down, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the silence settle before deciding what came next. Her first call was to Marston Pike, the attorney who had handled the sale of her medical tech company. He had always been patient and professional, never asking unnecessary questions. When he picked up, she asked him to gather full documentation. Every contract, valuation report, and financial summary tied to her $35 million sale. She wanted the numbers in black and white, ready for anyone who tried to twist her story. Marston didn't pry. He simply said he'd prepare everything and send digital and printed copies within a day. While she waited, she drove to a small cafe near her old neighborhood. There, she ran into a former neighbor, Mrs. Hadley, who had known the Hale family for decades. The older woman looked surprised to see her, but quickly invited her to sit. Within minutes, Mrs. Hadley mentioned the rumor spreading through the neighborhood. Savrin had supposedly stormed out of Thanksgiving after, refusing to help her parents with money. Hearing those words made something tight and sharp twist inside her chest. Her parents weren't just ignoring the truth. They were rewriting it to make her the selfish daughter who abandoned them. That moment changed everything. It wasn't enough to clear her name privately. She needed to pull back every layer of Beckett's manipulations, every lie he fed their parents, every wrong he covered with a smile. She wanted the truth to stand on its own, undeniable and complete. Over the next few days, she met with people who had known her family, old friends, distant relatives, and longtime neighbors. Some remembered strange incidents, like Beckett asking for money on behalf of the family, or Bill from down the street recalling that Beckett once bragged about handling the household bills while rolling in with new clothes. These conversations didn't give her proof, but they pointed her in the right direction. Savrin then began tracing old financial trails. She studied every payment she'd ever sent home. With Marston's help, she gained access to the records showing where the money had landed. The truth became clearer with each document she reviewed. None of the payments had gone where she intended. Every deposit she sent home had been redirected, rerouted, or withdrawn by Beckett. The final blow came when Marston forwarded her the records, showing that Beckett had emptied Grant and Alora's emergency savings. He had used their safety net to pay off part of his gambling debts. Savrin stared at the screen, her jaw tight, but her mind steady. This wasn't just carelessness. It was a pattern, and she was done staying silent. She was ready to fight back, this time with proof strong enough to break every lie he'd ever told. Savrin reached out to someone she hadn't spoken to since high school, Eamon Cross, a quiet, observant classmate who had grown into a respected financial investigator. They met at a small office downtown, a place filled with stacked files and the soft hum of computers running data checks. Eamon greeted her with a calm expression, but he could tell she wasn't just there for a social visit. Once they sat down, she explained everything she had uncovered so far, from the intercepted payments to the twisted rumors her parents believed. Eamon listened carefully, then asked her to give him any details she had, names, dates, patterns. After taking notes, he told her he'd run a search on Beckett. It didn't take long before he returned with information that made Savrin's stomach tighten. Eamon pulled up a scanned document on his screen and turned it toward her. It was a personal loan application from 2 years ago, carrying her name and a signature that looked almost like hers. But not quite. She stared at it for several seconds, feeling a cold wave sweep through her. "He forged it," Eamon said quietly. "This loan was approved under your identity." The loan amount was significant, and the repayment schedule showed missed payments, late fees, and collections notices. It wasn't just a bad decision. It was a crime committed in her name. Beckett had used her identity as a shield to protect himself. But that was only the beginning. Eamon continued his research, pulling up financial trails connected to Beckett. He uncovered links to a private poker ring known for aggressive debt collection. Beckett had been a regular player, often betting more than he could afford. When he lost, and he lost often, he borrowed money to stay afloat. He owed thousands to people who didn't accept excuses, only cash. The pressure of that world explained why Beckett had dug into his parents' savings, why he intercepted Savrin's payments, and why he lied so effortlessly. He wasn't just reckless, he was drowning. With Eamon's help, Savrin gathered everything she needed. They printed copies of the forged loan application, traced bank transfers showing money redirected from her accounts, and compiled statements from the poker ring's financial logs. Eamon highlighted every fraudulent signature, every suspicious withdrawal, every pattern that pointed directly at Beckett. The pile of evidence grew thicker by the hour, forming a timeline of manipulation that stretched back years. As Savrin read through the documents, something settled inside her. Not anger, not sadness, but understanding. Beckett hadn't targeted her because he hated her. He targeted her because she was the easiest person to blame. He depended on her silence, her distance, her unwillingness to fight. He had spent years shaping her into the villain, so he could hide his own failures. But now she had everything she needed to tear that story apart. She gathered the stack of evidence, placed it neatly into a folder, and closed it with a steady hand. The truth was no longer scattered or hidden. It was organized, clear, and undeniable. It was time to confront her family with everything Beckett never wanted them to see. Savrin drove back to her parents' house with a steady calm she hadn't felt in years. Marston Pike sat in the passenger seat, holding the folder filled with every document she had gathered. The closer they came to the Hale home, the heavier the air felt, but Savrin didn't waver. She wasn't coming for approval or an apology. She was coming for the truth. When she stepped inside, Alora's eyes narrowed immediately. She didn't even say hello. "So you came back to pick another fight?" she snapped, folding her arms like she was preparing for a storm. Her tone held the same sharpness Savrin grew up with, the kind that dismissed her before she even spoke. Savrin simply placed the folder on the dining table. "I came to clear the lies," she said softly. Before she could open it, Beckett walked in. His face shifted from annoyance to fake surprise the moment he saw Marston. "Whoa, what's all this?" he said with a nervous laugh. "Why bring a lawyer into a family disagreement?" He glanced at the folder and immediately recognized the documents. His expression tightened for a split second before he forced another smile. "I don't know what you think you found, Save," he added, trying to sound confused and offended at the same time. "This all looks like a mix-up." Savrin opened the folder without a word and spread out the printed pages. The forged loan application, the bank transfers, the proof of her intercepted payments. Each document landed on the table with a quiet finality. Marston explained each piece calmly, pointing to signatures, dates, and transaction IDs. Alora's face paled, but she didn't speak. Grant, however, stepped forward with a deep frown. "Savrin," he said sternly, "I think you're misunderstanding something. These things happen. Maybe you're reading too much into it." She looked at him, stunned not by his disbelief but by how fast he reached for excuses. Even with the papers right in front of him, he couldn't consider that Beckett had done something wrong. It wasn't hesitation, it was habit. A lifetime of choosing the easier story, the one that didn't shake the image of their perfect son. Beckett tried again, voice trembling slightly. "Save, come on. I would never forge anything. You probably just forgot signing this. And those payments. Maybe you sent them wrong. It happens." Savrin slid the proof of his forged signature across the table. Eamon had matched the handwriting. The signature wasn't hers. It wasn't even close. Beckett's face drained of color. Still, Grant shook his head. People make mistakes. Maybe the bank mixed things up. It became clear, no amount of evidence would crack the wall they built around Beckett. They weren't protecting him because they believed him. They were protecting him because they needed to. But Savrin didn't rely on belief. She relied on truth. She gathered the remaining documents, the ones even stronger than what she'd shown so far. If they wanted to pretend this was a misunderstanding, she was ready to show them just how deep the lies went. Their denial didn't scare her anymore. She had more evidence, and she wasn't done. Savrin reached into the folder again, pulling out a second stack of documents, this time thicker, heavier, and impossible to argue with. She laid out the records one by one, each showing the exact amounts she had sent home over the years. 42 payments in total. Together, they added up to more than $82,000. "This is what I sent you," she said quietly. "Every transfer. Every date. Every confirmation." Alora leaned forward, her eyes scanning the numbers. Her expression went from confusion to disbelief, then to something tighter, fear. Grant took one of the papers and stared at it as if it were written in another language. "You sent this?" he murmured, stunned. "Yes," Savrin replied. "And none of it reached you." Before either parent could respond, she added, "Because Beckett intercepted every single payment." The room went still. Even Beckett stopped pretending for a moment, his face tightening before he forced a laugh that sounded thin and hollow. "That's not true," he said quickly. "Save must have sent them wrong. Or the bank mixed something up. You know how systems are." But Alora didn't look convinced anymore. Her gaze moved from the documents to Beckett's face, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Grant set the papers down with a shaking hand. "Then, the money you said you put toward our retirement." Savrin cut him off gently. "I'm sorry, Dad. That came from me. Not Beckett. And he didn't put it aside for you. He took it." Alora's breath hitched. "Took it? What do you mean took it?" Marston stepped in, his voice calm and professional. He placed another file on the table. "This is documentation of Mr. Beckett Hale's gambling activity. These are the credit lines he opened. And these," he said, tapping the final pages, "are the threats from the individuals he owes money to." The words hit the room like a lightning strike. Alora's hand flew to her mouth as she read. Grant's face drained of color. The more they looked, the deeper the truth cut. This wasn't one mistake. It was a long pattern of lies, desperation, and selfishness masked by charm. Beckett snapped under the pressure. "This is Savrin's fault," he shouted, pointing at her with a shaking hand. "If she hadn't left, if she hadn't made things so hard, if she had just helped the family, I wouldn't have had to do any of this." His voice cracked, but no one rushed to defend him this time. Not even Alora. Marston remained composed. "Mr. Hale, the documents don't lie. You forged signatures, stole funds, and took money buried in your parents' accounts. This is evidence, not opinion." Alora sank into the nearest chair, tears spilling down her face. Grant stood frozen, his normally stern expression broken and empty. For the first time in her life, Savrin watched her parents process a truth they couldn't twist or deny. She wasn't shaking anymore. She wasn't holding back or shrinking to fit their expectations. She stood tall in the center of the living room. The same room where she had been dismissed, ignored, and talked over for years. Now every eye was on her. And for the first time, she controlled the story. The fallout began faster than any of them expected. Only a day after Savrin revealed the truth, the first call came. Grant answered the phone, expecting a relative or a neighbor, but instead a firm voice asked for Beckett and mentioned an outstanding balance. Grant hung up, unsettled. An hour later, another call came, this time more forceful, demanding immediate repayment. By evening, 3 different creditors had contacted the Hale house. Each call chipped away at the denial Grant and Alora had leaned on for years. What truly shattered them was the 4th call. This one wasn't just about money, it was about collateral. The man on the line explained, in blunt and impatient terms, that Beckett had used the Hale family home as leverage for a loan. Grant froze mid-sentence, his hand gripping the receiver. "Our house," he repeated, barely able to get the words out. "Yes," the caller said. "If the payment doesn't come through, steps will be taken to recover the amount." When Grant hung up, he looked pale and older than Savrin had ever seen him. "He used our home," he whispered, "without telling us." Alora turned toward Beckett with wide, shaking eyes. "Tell me this isn't true," she begged. But Beckett offered nothing. No denial, no explanation, just silence that said everything. Savrin watched from the other side of the room. She felt no satisfaction. This wasn't revenge. It was the cost of years of lies catching up to her family. When Beckett finally spoke, his voice was thin and desperate. "Save, you have money. You can fix this. Please." She met his gaze steadily. "No," she said. "I'm not cleaning up your mess again." Alora stepped forward, tears gathering in her eyes. "Please, Savrin. You can help save the family. You've always been the responsible one. You can put everything back together." Her voice cracked, but the expectation in it was the same as always. Savrin would fold, and they would move on as if nothing had happened. But the memory of being told to go live in the streets was still fresh. The years of dismissal, the rejection, the lies, they all stood between them now. "You kicked me out like I meant nothing," Savrin said softly. "And now you want me to be the one who fixes everything?" Alora broke down completely. Grant stood silently behind her, unable to defend their past words. Savrin took a slow breath. I'll offer one thing, she said. Only one. Both parents looked up with fragile hope. I'll pay for legal fees so you don't lose the house. But only if Beckett signs a full written confession clearing my name. Every lie he told, every misdirected payment, every forged signature, it all has to be in writing. Beckett's face twisted with anger. You're doing this to punish me, he snapped. I'm doing this to free myself, she replied. The room fell into heavy silence. The family that once stood on shaky foundations now felt split beyond repair. And for the first time, Savrin didn't feel trapped inside their collapse. She felt absolutely free. Beckett's reaction to the confession was immediate and explosive. The moment Marston placed the document in front of him, he shoved it away so hard it slid across the table. I'm not signing anything, he shouted, his face reddening. You're all trying to ruin me. This is some setup. Save's been waiting for this. He paced around the living room like a trapped animal, knocking over a lamp and slamming his fist against the wall. Elora cried for him to stop, while Grant stood frozen, unable to process the chaos unfolding in his own home. Savrin stayed silent, her expression calm, the confession sitting untouched on the table like a final doorway he refused to walk through. Marston didn't flinch. He simply picked up the phone and made a call. Within minutes, an investigator arrived, a man who had already been working on Beckett's forged loan case. When Beckett saw him step through the front door, his anger flickered into fear. The investigator laid out the situation clearly. If you refuse to sign, he said, the charges will move forward. Forgery, identity misuse, and fraudulent borrowing carry serious consequences. Signing won't erase what you did, but it will show cooperation. Beckett stared at him, breathing heavily, the reality finally closing in. His bravado crumbled. His shoulders sagged. He sank into a chair and covered his face with his hands. When he finally reached for the pen, his hands trembled so violently the tip scraped the paper. He signed each page while sobbing, muttering excuses. How he was stressed, how he didn't mean harm, how he had been forced by circumstances, how none of it was really his fault. He never once apologized. When it was done, Savrin didn't look triumphant or angry. She simply collected the pages, stacked them neatly, and handed them directly to Marston. Make sure it's filed today, she said quietly. He nodded, slipping the confession into his briefcase with the certainty of someone who knew its weight. Elora wiped her face and tried to gather herself. Savrin, since you're already here, why don't you stay for dinner? We can talk. Maybe we can start over. The offer hung in the air like a desperate attempt to pretend their world hadn't just collapsed. Savrin looked at her mother, really looked at her, at the fragile hope, the denial, the sudden shift from rejection to need. It didn't move her. No, she said gently but firmly. I won't stay. She walked through the house slowly, not out of nostalgia but clarity. Her fingertips brushed the doorframe where she once measured her height. She glanced at the living room where she was always told to lower her voice. She paused at the kitchen she once cleaned alone while Beckett received praise for setting one plate on the table. But there was no emotion, no grief, no longing, just a quiet acceptance that this house had shaped her, but it no longer owned her. At the front door, she stepped outside without looking back. The cool air felt like a new beginning brushing against her skin. Her past stayed behind those walls. Her future waited somewhere else, somewhere she could breathe without being diminished. She left determined, steady, and finally free to rebuild a life that didn't include them. Savrin chose Oregon because it felt like a place untouched by her past. She drove along the coast until she found a small town with quiet streets, ocean mist drifting over the rooftops, and cliffs that seemed to hold the world still. On a hill overlooking the water, she found a simple house with wide windows and enough space for solitude. She bought it without hesitation. The moment she stepped inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, room to breathe. The first thing she set up was a small research studio in the spare room. She cleared out the old furniture, brought in her equipment, and reopened files she hadn't looked at in years. Before everything with her family, she'd been working on a medical tech idea that could help rural clinics track patient progress more easily. She had abandoned the project when life got too heavy, but now, in this quiet coastal space, she felt drawn back to it. Each day she worked for a few hours, letting her ideas grow again without pressure or judgment. For the first time, her work felt like hers, not something she had to defend or hide. One morning, as she sipped coffee on her porch facing the ocean, her phone rang. It was Marston. His voice was calm, as always, but this time softer. He told her that Beckett had checked himself into rehab. After the confession and the collapse of his lies, he had nowhere left to run. According to Marston, he had hit bottom hard. No more pretending, no more charm, no more excuses. For a moment, Savrin didn't know how to feel. Not joy, not sorrow, just a quiet understanding that people only change when everything else is stripped away. A week later, a letter arrived in her mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's, sturdy and careful. Inside was a single page written by both her parents. Gran apologized first, admitting he had been blind, that he had chosen the easy child instead of the honest one. Alora's words were shakier. She said she was sorry for the things she had said, for the years she made Savrin feel small, for the way she clung to a picture of her family that never existed. Neither asked for money. Neither begged her to return. They simply said they were sorry. Savrin sat at her kitchen table, reading the letter twice. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She didn't write back. She didn't need to. The apology wasn't closure, for them maybe, but not for her. Her closure had come the moment she walked out of that house without looking back. That evening, she stepped onto her porch again. The sky shifted from gold to deep orange as the sun sank behind the waves. The air smelled of salt, pine, and something else, freedom. For the first time in years, she felt no weight on her shoulders, no fear of being misunderstood, no ties trying to pull her backward. Just peace. Real, quiet peace. And it was finally hers. For weeks after that Thanksgiving night, Savrin sat in her Oregon home, the soft hum of her laptop the only sound in the room. She had been working steadily on the revival of her medical tech idea, building a small team remotely, slowly shaping a new company she didn't plan to announce until it was stable. She hadn't rushed anything. She wanted it to feel right. That morning, an email arrived with a subject line so simple she almost skipped it: contract approval notice. When she opened it, her breath caught. A major healthcare organization had reviewed her proposal, loved her platform, and officially awarded her a contract worth $12 million. The kind of deal others waited years for had come quietly to her doorstep in that peaceful house overlooking the water. She leaned back in her chair, letting the news sink in. There was no one to brag to, no one she needed to prove herself to. The success was entirely hers, built from her work, her mind, and her determination. As the excitement settled into a warm, steady pride, another thought surfaced. For weeks ago, her father had told her to go live in the streets, believing she was a burden. And now here she was, signing a contract that added millions more to her already solid fortune. She didn't feel bitter, just aware of how far she had come without them. Later that afternoon, Marston sent her a short update. The Hale family home, where she had grown up, where she had been dismissed, criticized, and eventually thrown out, was officially listed for sale. The debts Beckett accumulated had eaten through every safety net her parents had. The house was their last major asset, and now even that was slipping away. Savrin stared at the listing photo on her screen. The familiar windows, the porch, the trimmed lawn. She remembered walking through that house one last time, letting every memory slide off her shoulders. Now the place that once held her hostage would belong to someone else, and she felt no urge to save it or the people inside it. She closed the tab without hesitation. Later, she stepped outside onto her porch, the wooden boards warm beneath her feet. The ocean stretched out endlessly, waves curling and breaking under the late afternoon sky. A soft breeze lifted her hair, and for the first time, she felt like the world around her matched the life she was finally creating. Quiet, steady, peaceful. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind wash away the last pieces of her past. No more proving herself. No more shrinking to fit the Hale family's narrow view. No more carrying wounds she didn't deserve. When she opened her eyes, the horizon glowed with gold, and she breathed in deeply. Her life was finally her own. Did Savrin make the right choice by stepping away from her family for good? Or do you think she should have given them another chance after everything that happened? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new one.